Welcome, everyone, to this edition of Popcorn Diaries. I'm Joe.
And I'm Adriana.
And today we are going to dissect one of our favorite movies of all time in the action-adventure genre, and that is HellBoy. Well, I got to tell you, it's been a while since I've seen this movie, so I did refresh my brain, if you will, and I did watch it recently. And, for a 10-year-old movie, this thing really holds up really, really well.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on that one. The movie has definitely held up after, 10 years? This year? 10 years.
That's right. It was 2004 that it was made.
Yeah, so it's definitely been a movie that has a good following. They followed it up with HellBoy 2.
And I believe I saw a blip on HellBoy 3 is rumored.
Yeah, I did hear that rumor too. I was hoping that they would make the third one because this was a good franchise, a good series. And, they have to do it soon because Ron Perlman is not getting any younger. So hopefully if they do plan on making the third one, it's going to be soon.
I got to say, I really love the opening to this movie. It's got such a Indiana Jones feel to it. They're on this island. It's raining. There's everyone's kind of not sure what's going on. You got the army guys that are kind of like, we don't know what's going on. And I got a thing for rainy scenes. When I see lots of rain in the scene, it's going to be good.
Yeah, I do like the rainy scenes. Although I've got to say, the one thing I like the opening, but the one thing I did not like about the opening was the actual voiceover. I don't know. I just do not like his voice. There's something about it that just rings false.
Yeah, I've got to agree that the dubbed-in accent on the young professor in the beginning of the movie, yeah, you could buy it, but you knew that was probably not his voice.
Yeah, there was just something about it that was kind of false for me, and it took me a little bit away from what I was seeing. But once we jump into the present day, it all changes. For me, the movie starts in the present day just because the actors that are playing it, they're very, very convincing. There's some great special effects right in the beginning. We've got all these things going on. We get introduced to a very young HellBoy, which follows along with the comics. HellBoy was introduced as a young character.
They did a great job of animating baby HellBoy. So, he looked pretty convincing. The opening was pretty good, but it really doesn't get going, as you said, until they get into the present day, which is a little weird because you're not really sure when is the present day. We know it's 60 years later. Because they do say 60 years, but...
Which actually would be 2004, because, if you follow along the comic book story, because the comic book says that HellBoy was brought over in 1944. So 60 years later would have made it 2004, which is the year that the movie was released. So I don't know if that's what they were trying to say with present day, but... present day could be anything. You know how that goes. So let's talk about the story. What do you think about the story of this movie?
Well, I'm always a big fan of the big oafy guy who saves the world. I always have a soft spot for that kind of a story, and they do not disappoint here. As soon as you're introduced to HellBoy in present day, it took me all of about 10 seconds to buy into him. He's just a lovable character. He's just got that swagger about him. He's got the cigar going. You just know that this is going to be a fun ride.
I have to agree with you on that one. And they couldn't have chose somebody better to play HellBoy than Ron Perlman. I was really happy with the choice. First of all, because I had seen Ron Perlman previously in another movie where he played this kind of big, oaf, lovable character. I think I mentioned this movie to you, which was City of Lost Children, which is actually a French film. But he played that character the same, and seeing him as HellBoy was just so believable. I was able to buy into his character right away. He is HellBoy, You look at him and he is just HellBoy. The mannerisms, the whole package is there. And he sells it very well. So I was really happy about that. All the other characters also were pretty good. And the story, I must say, I'm also a big fan of hero-type movies. I love hero-type movies. I love action and adventure. So this movie is actually one of my favorites in this genre. So I'm really glad we're jumping into this one.
Interesting fact about Ron Perlman being chosen for HellBoy, and I do agree with you, there is no other choice. He is perfect for the role. They did consider our good friend Vin Diesel.
Yes, I did remember seeing that he was up for the part, but thankfully it went to Ron Perlman.
Yep, the studio wanted Vin, but both Mike Mignola and Del Toro both came up with Ron Perlman and said, nope, That's who's going to be in the movie.
Well, speaking of the story, actually this was written by Guillermo del Toro, Peter Briggs, and Mike Mignola from the comic books was on hand to actually give input into the story, which is why I think it becomes such a strong story. This was a great introduction movie for the series. Hellboy, the comic, has had large success. It's had a great following since 1993 when it was first released. And now seeing it on screen with such a strong introduction, I was really happy with it. I know there are still people out there that are not going to be completely content because it's not exactly like the comic books. Well, nothing ever is exactly like the original story, but I think they did a great job in introducing him, introducing a good premise, a good plot line, great characters that were followed up in the second movie.
Well, I've never read the comic book, but just watching the way this movie develops, especially in early stages, I was perfectly fine with the story. So, I don't have anything to compare it to of how it was really written during the comic book stage. But I was perfectly fine with the way they introduced Hellboy and the other characters. And, they started to develop the story about going and chasing down the bad monsters. Yes. And that. So I thought they did a great job. Those people who are a little miffed by that's not following the comic book, get over it.
So let's jump into the actors. So let's talk about the acting, the actual performances of the characters. So let's kick it off with Ron Perlman. We both agree. Perfect choice for this movie. His portrayal of Hellboy is very believable. He sells it through the whole movie. And you see him jump into the second movie and he is the same character. I am sure he studied the comic books because they do talk about the oversized revolver. They talk about some of the characteristics of Hellboy plus his powers. And he sells that. He walks around with that swagger. He's got that cigar constantly. I love that whole tidbit with the cigar, I must say. I love the whole tidbit with the cigar. Yeah, and the wisecracking. His sense of humor was one of the things that they talked about, as the original comic book character had this innate sense of humor. And so did Ron Perlman in this movie. He had this little sarcastic wit of humor that I just loved. So what did you think?
Yeah, there's no doubt from the opening, he does take control. This is his movie. He knows it, and he plays that part very, very well. Apparently, he read through every one of the Hellboy comic books before to prepare for this part. So he did his homework, it shows, and he's a very commanding actor and took it that way throughout this movie, and he did a great, great job.
So let's talk about some of the other performances. So we had a nice performance from John Hurt coming into this as the professor.
As the professor. Mm-hmm.
Very lovable character. He's an aging professor. He was the first one to find Hellboy. He raised him. You can see that connection between the two characters, young, almost, because Hellboy at this point is kind of still in an adolescent stage.
Yeah, a little rambunctious and, escaping at night and, that type of thing.
And the professor, he's older, he's very sick at this point. We know that the end is coming for him. So there is that sadness when he meets his end. But through and through, John Hurt gave a great performance for this.
Yeah, you can see the instant connection when we first see them together. The professor comes in and Perlman just looks up at him and says, "Father," and he kind of ducks his head down a little bit. So yeah, you could see there was a really good connection there. They played that part perfectly together.
Also, Selma Blair. I didn't like Selma Blair in certain other films. There was something about her that I didn't like or connect with. But I've got to say, seeing her as Liz in this movie, I was able to connect with her character. And she sold this character very well. Very dark, very tormented character that she had to play, who Hellboy had a big, huge crush on.
Yep, that he did. And what I found interesting is the way the story develops is you really don't know who she is. They introduce her, and it's like, well, who's this? You don't even realize there in the beginning that Hellboy has been escaping out to go meet with her. And I agree. She did play the part very, very well. Very reserved, kind of low-key, troubled, dark, which just fit into the overall feel of this movie.
And we can't talk about characters without talking about Doug Jones, who played Abe Sapien. He is one of the best character actors out there, or creature character actors out there. He's played a few different roles where he's in full makeup. And I mean, you have to sell a performance when you're wearing this much makeup. Also with Ron Perlman, I mean, he was in full gear, full foam applications and things like that. And Doug Jones just sells Abe throughout this whole movie. The mannerisms, the way that he moves, the expressions that he brings to life with this character. I really love the character Abe Sapien.
Yeah, I typically don't buy into this type of a character very, easily, because I know it's a bunch of makeup and it's a bunch of latex thrown on somebody and, and it's the, it's Gill Man, Iguana Man, Water Man. It's like, okay. So going into this movie, I'm going, if there's a character that's not going to work for me, it's going to be this guy. But I was wrong. pretty quickly on, okay, I'll buy into it. He was okay. He didn't push his part over the edge to be Aquaman type of a thing, so I thought he did a great job. And I thought also they did a great, great job on the makeup, which I understand took hours and hours and hours
Oh,
for,
yeah.
for
This
that
is
to be
full
put
days
on.
applications for both Hellboy and Abe Sapien. So, 4 hours plus sitting in a chair, getting all this stuff applied to you, and then having to go out and sell that performance. You have to hand it to these two actors that they through and through sold this performance.
Something interesting about the other characters, there's a lot of supporting characters that did a great job. Of course, what I thought was interesting is, all the agents running around. Some of those faces were familiar. We've seen some of those folks before. If you caught their character names as they were being said here and there, all their last names are like Earth names. Clay, Lime, Moss, Corey.
If we're going to talk about agents, we can't dismiss Jeffrey Tambor, who played Tom Manning, who was the head of, one of the Alphabet Soup organizations, who was in charge of having to cover up all of the Hellboy sightings. And he, this Jeffrey Tambor is such a great actor, and his performance in this is so awesome. He's got this sense of humor, this weird sense of humor that, he's back and forth with Hellboy. They're constantly bickering. He's always trying to get Hellboy to follow the rules, to stay behind and be invisible in a sense. There's this great, element of argument between the two and bickering. Jeffrey Tambor will bicker with Hellboy to the point where Hellboy gets angry and kind of gets up in his face, and then he has to run away. So that I thought was great. That really brought a great comedic sense to this otherwise dark story.
Yeah, no, he's definitely a comic relief throughout. I think there's one scene where he tells Hellboy, that's it, lock him up. He's not getting out. That's it. We're done doing this. And you just say, yeah, right. Like that's going to happen. Yeah. He's a great actor. He's been in many, 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 many movies.
Oh, yes.
He's
had a long-standing career.
Yeah, and he typically plays this kind of a part, which he does so very well. And I was glad to see him in the movie. But we can't discount the other bad guys that were in there. Rasputin, of course, played by Corel Roden. He did a pretty good job throughout the movie when he made his appearances. Definitely creeped me out. No doubt he was a bad guy. And he had this just kind of cool about him, how he was, low-key and like you knew he was like extra, extra evil.
Very suave, yes. I have to agree with you on that one. He is not a very hot-tempered character. He comes on the scene very suave, cool, and collected. So this man is out to get you. And if you survive, you're lucky. So let's move on and talk about some of the special effects in Hellboy. What did you think?
There's great special effects pretty much all the way through. There was only a few places that I, kind of caught like, okay, that could have been a little bit better. And that's probably nothing more than it's being 10 years since that movie was made. And we're used to seeing just a little higher caliber of special effects. Obviously, the makeup they did on all the characters was outstanding. You couldn't have done a better job there. Their explosions were good. When he flips the car over, he stops the car and it flips over, all the characters there out in the street. That was a very well done stunt. And especially when the monster was running amok, if you will, in the crowd and jumps on the truck and you get these big deep prints kind of up in the top of the roof. They did a great job with that. So you could tell there was a lot of good old-fashioned effects here.
So there's definitely a great mix of special effects in this movie. You've got CG, you've got special effects stunts that are done by stunt characters, and you've got, the full makeup effects that they went with, which I thought was a great choice. Instead of going full on 3D and just motion capturing and then recreating everything 3D, the fact that you have an actor in the suit that can still, give a good performance really sells this film, makes a believable character. And I have to say, Guillermo del Toro always has a great vision when it comes to creature creation. I'm sure the art department, renders everything out for him and they draw everything out for him. But this all comes from his style and vision. And you can see it in all the characters that he develops for this franchise and other franchises as well.
Yeah, he did a great job in picking the sets that they used. They used a lot of real physical sets. There wasn't a whole lot of green screen and that type of thing. So when you see characters flying and things breaking down in the subway, I mean, those were sets. Those were real. And yes, he did jump on that train at 45 miles an hour, broke a rib, according from what I read. So I mean, there was a lot of physical stunts, either by the actors or by stunt people. And I always love those kind of movies because it makes it more believable to me, especially when I know they are really doing this while they're filming it, and how difficult that is to pull that off.
Granted, 3D special effects have become more of the norm these days, and the texturing and layering of textures has become almost realistic. You've got movies like we talked about Elysium, we talked about District 9 and things like that, where the 3D is so composited and blended into the scene that it's seamless. But I still have to say that I like movies where you've got actors in the full makeup because it just gives more life to the performance. Another movie that did this with creatures was also Underworld. Instead of going the full 3D with the wolves, they did animatronics and, characters in full makeup. And I think it sells the performance even more, and it blends so much better with the final product.
Yeah, I think probably one of the hardest things for actors to do is when they're not in, full makeup or full gear, and they're just dressed up in, whatever to blend into a scene while they're green screening, and they have tracking marks on them and things like that. That how do they really get into character? There's no doubt that when Perlman was done getting makeup for the day, that he was in character. Yeah. And it shows. And I think all of these characters that we talked about before fall into that. But I got to tell you, one of my favorite special effects in this movie is Ivan the Corpse.
Oh, my God, yes.
Was that good? Maybe it's because of the zombie stuff that's going on these days, but that was so good on his back as he's walking around, and it's the guy's looking around.
It is so funny. It is such a funny little bit that I love that. That whole scene where they go underground and, you get these huge spaces underground under this cemetery is just so believable and so wonderful. And yeah, I have to agree with you. That special effect was done to perfection.
Yeah, that was a perfect set choice, by the way, because whenever you're in a graveyard and someone says, oh, there's a bunch of catacombs under here that go on for miles, you just say, oh, yeah, there is. Because that's real.
Yeah, I know, but at least they sold it in this movie. I was very happy with the set design for the catacombs in this movie. So let's move on and talk a little bit about the sound of this movie, because you have to consider that no movie is a full, complete production without some great sound effects and sound production. So what did you think about the sound for HellBoy?
Well, first off, I'm very critical about sound. That is, I almost pay more attention to that than the visuals of a movie itself. So, because it is truly a complete package. And you got to see this in surround sound. Don't fool yourself. Don't watch it on your little TV at home. You will not get the true impact of this. A great mixing all around by the sound guys on this. The crashes, especially when HellBoy hits things, either with his body or his right hand of doom. And that, I mean, just perfect mix of all that. And then, boy, they turn it on, they turn it off in a hurry, too. And they do a really good job of that. But I had it cranking. I was rocking the house, and I loved every bit of the sound in this one. They did a great job.
Yeah, Michael Axon, who was actually the Foley editor for this movie, I think he did a phenomenal job getting those Foley sound effects in there. And for those of you that are not familiar with what Foley sound effects are, it's actually every time you hear a footstep, every time you hear a punch or anything like that, it's not what's recorded during the performance. It's actually recorded after the fact while a Foley artist is watching the movie. He will recreate the sounds and they record them and then mix them in. The editor for this, like I said, Michael Axon, I think he did a phenomenal job. This was done so well, so seamless. The sound design for this was so great. So I have to agree with you. The sound really sells, especially a movie like this where it's action adventure and there's so much action going on. There's hits, there's punches, there's gunfire. There's so much to pay attention to. And one little sound effect that doesn't sell it takes you out of the story.
Yeah, very, very true. And of course, my favorite sound effect was in it early on when they we're on the island and the portal opens up and and that one German gets sucked into the portal. That is the Wilhelm scream. Yeah. And that's so as soon as I heard the Wilhelm scream, I said, okay, I'm good. This is going to be a good movie. But they did a great job. I thought they did an extra special job with the sound when the entire hospital goes up in flames. Mm-hmm. They just mixed that so well as the fire develops and this whole building goes up. That was just
and great. You never, you don't, if you stop to think about it, fire, we think, is silent, but when fire rushes at you in such a degree, it does have that almost wind rush effect. And they sold that sound effect very well. I was also very happy with the sound effects that they created for Samael, which is a character that doesn't exist anywhere in the world. So how do you come up with sound effects for something that doesn't exist? Well, they did it. Yeah, it's very slimy, very organic. And, these Foley artists did a great job with the sound effect and the sound editing was done well. The musical score was great. I think everything overall in this movie was top notch and sold the movie very well.
Yeah, very complete package. When you look at the big picture, as we always do on movies, you look at the actors, you look at the sound, you look at the set design, everything that goes into it. This is really, really well balanced. There's really not a weak spot anywhere. I mean, you could get picky. Yeah, there's some continuity errors here and there, and there's a couple of special effects that maybe could have been a little bit better. But overall, it's a really, really complete package.
Yeah, I have to agree. So to wrap it up, we have to say we both love this movie. It is definitely something that if you like action, adventure, or just enjoy comic books, it is definitely a movie that you should go out and watch. We do have several copies here in the library, but guess what? They are always checked out. So what does that tell you? It's a good movie.
It's a good movie. And what is surprising about this movie from a business standpoint, they made it for about $60 million, and it made about $100 million. So it made some money. Okay, but that's not big money in Hollywood these days. No. That's okay money. And it was surprising that, they went ahead with the HellBoy 2, which they made for a few dollars more, but that one basically doubled its money. So actually the second one made more money than the first one.
And I think if they would have followed up with a third one, they would have gotten a very good following with this franchise. And there are still people waiting and anticipating and hoping that the rumors are true. So who knows? Time will tell.
Yeah, I'm sure there will be a third one because, Hollywood never walks away from a profit.
So anything left to add?
For all you comic book people out there that are focused in on the little tidbits, when HellBoy says to Myers, what got you this job pushing pancakes, he does mispronounce pancakes as Pam cakes deliberately because that is a nod to the comic Right Hand of Doom. So pay attention. There's a lot of that kind of stuff in there when you watch this movie. So what's next for Popcorn Diaries?
Next time on Popcorn Diaries, we are going to discuss the blockbusters of the past. So we're going to talk about what makes a blockbuster. Is it the ticket sales, the hype, the advertising? And we're also going to talk about some of the blockbuster flops. So some of the movies that you thought were going to be great and then didn't do so great at the box office. So that's what we're going to be talking about in the next episode.
Until next time, I'm Joe.
And I'm Adriana.
We'll see you next time on
Popcorn Diaries.